Wolfenstein Youngblood is a difficult game to talk about because any positive attitude towards the game seems to be confused with an ignorance or an acceptance of its flaws, and because of that, Youngblood is definitely one of the more interesting games I've recently played. It's a game that brought together two of Bethesda's titans, Machine Games and Arcane, to create a game that exists at the halfway point between Wolfenstein and Dishonored. It doesn't quite reach the heights of either of those franchises, which seems to be the main point of contention against it. However, I've played far worse games than this, which have only gotten a fraction of the vitriol this one did, which puzzles me greatly. I rather like Youngblood. Quite a bit, actually. And today I thought I'd share a different perspective on this game, or at least one that isn't as in-your-face about how terrible the game is as some others.
You know what the bottom line is? He doesn't want to be found, Anya. And if BJ fucking Blazkowicz doesn't want to be found, there is nothing and no one on God's green earth that's gonna find his ass.
Youngblood takes place during the 80s in the Machine Games Wolfenstein universe, and what is easily one of the best things about the game is its contextually modernized and consistent aesthetic. The game not only oozes its updated style, but it remains visually consistent with the last three games while doing so. Dotya Hood creations, which 20 years back were rare and in prototype stages, are now mass manufactured and used by your characters and the enemies alike. Nazi propaganda has evolved into Nazi advertising that plasters the streets of New Paris, promoting cigarettes or VHS tapes which contain a rewriting of history through the eyes of the Reich. You'll also regularly see paintings of Hitler on walls, not the weak and frail Hitler we met in the New Colossus, but the strong and poised Führer that elevated Germany to heights unimaginable. As you learn while playing, Nazi Germany's power and influence has waned after the liberation of America, and even their only remaining footholds in Europe are in trouble due to the rise of a secret organization in the Nazi ranks that seeks to distance itself from the incompetence that got them to such a low point. Still, the Nazis are a considerable threat, and their occupation of France has left the country in a state of ruin, with parts of Paris entirely rebuilt, and others war-torn as the French resistance combat Nazi forces. There was a great attention to the detail of the world of this game. I've always thought that Wolfenstein did an incredible job of integrating the Nazis into a post-Nazi world, and in this regard, Youngblood is no exception. Even as I write this, I can hear the fantastic remix of Toe the Line from The New Order that plays in many of this game's levels over and over in my head. A big shout out to Ross Tregenza, who did the New Order remixes for this game. They sound straight out of the 80s, and they're perfect. The world Youngblood takes place in also happens to be where you feel Arcane's influence the strongest in this game, with the different parts of Paris designed in Dishonored's open-ended fashion in favor of Wolfenstein's usual linearity. I was initially on the fence about this substitution, but the more I played the game, the more I understood why it works. To me, the appeal of Wolfenstein's gameplay is the choice provided to the player to either play the game using stealth or to go all out with the action. I think Youngblood appeals to me since the entire game is essentially Dishonored's high chaos gameplay without the implications such a playstyle would have on the story. Because the levels are built like Dishonored's, you get the same choice to do stealth or to go all out with the action as you do in previous Wolfensteins. So if you fail on the stealth, the worst thing that can possibly happen to you is that you get to use Wolfenstein's amazing gunplay to blast your way out of a situation. Youngblood, again, doesn't do the best of either gameplay playstyle, which we'll get into detail about later, but what it creates when it merges the two is a unique, if sometimes plotting, experience. Youngblood sees you traveling to all these parts of New Paris to find entrances to Brothers, fortresses where you'll find information that will hopefully lead you to the whereabouts of BJ. There's side missions you can do when assigned them from members of the French resistance that give you a reason to further explore these districts because you're rewarded with currency and skill points for completing them. Currency is used to upgrade your weapons and to buy new skins, and skill points are used to level up your abilities. I've seen this gameplay loop before, and I now perfectly understand why it's implemented in this game. Repetition is usually considered a problem among game critics, but I'm personally very opposed to this complaint because I believe repetition is only a problem when what's being repeated is a problem. The issue hardly being the concept of repetition. When you're making a presumably lower budget and smaller scope game like Youngblood, what you're relying on primarily is the gameplay. Cutscenes and more story are out of the scope of the project because of their cost, so you're only left with gameplay, and even then, you're still producing that with a comparatively limited set of resources to your franchise's main titles. This is why side missions often see you going straight back into places you just were, and why sections of Paris are level gated and certain rooms weapon gated. They're designed in a way where furthering the gameplay doesn't always mean adding in new things, but instead giving you access to things that were already there. And it can work, in my opinion, if the game offers enough variety, which I believe Youngblood does. You've got the 3 different areas of Paris, the 3 underground sections of those areas, the 3 brothers, and then Lab X at the end of the game. By introducing RPG mechanics, the game is able to segment its character progression so that going to all these different areas and then going back to them later on in side missions feels different since you'll be at different stages of your progression. Going through a level a second time won't play the same way it did the first time because you should have new weapons, new weapon attachments, and upgraded abilities that are meant to break up the perceived monotony of it all. This, of course, is the reason enemies respawn area to area, because if they didn't, you'd just be walking to and from places against no threat, which means no gameplay. You're incentivized to take these fights with the XP reward you get for killing the enemies. The more fights you win, the stronger you become. The combat in Youngblood gets progressively easier the more you play the game, because enemies are, with few exception and contrary to popular belief, always relatively weaker than you are. Youngblood introduces an ammo vulnerability system where certain enemies are more susceptible against light ammo and other enemies heavy ammo. If you play the game by the rules, enemies get wrecked against the right weapons. The idea that this game has bullet sponge enemies is, quite frankly, horse shit, and a complaint seemingly peddled by a combination of a misunderstanding of the game's mechanics and an early perspective on the game where you haven't obtained the craftwork weapons or even upgraded anything. A simple fire rate upgrade on the machine pistol, for example, renders enemies of that ammo vulnerability melted in a second. That's not even taking into account that you can dual wield these things. You also probably have been told that you can one-shot 95% of the enemies in this game with melee. Despite all the talk of bullet sponges, if you played Youngblood with even a modicum of competence, you'd realize that it takes longer to kill the Panzerhund in the new Colossus than it does to kill it in Youngblood. I've died more times fighting Panzerhunds in the previous games than I died in all of Youngblood. How these enemies, and stronger enemies, are not considered bullet sponges in the New Order and the new Colossus, yet they are in Youngblood, the game where you can quite literally two-shot the Panzerhunds with the lasercraft work, is mind-boggling. The gameplay doesn't lie. Do these look like bullet sponges to you? The difficulty complaints about Youngblood are especially strange, because it's actually a considerably easier game than the New Order or the new Colossus with its addition of the pep signal, where you and your partner can gift each other health and armor. There's again a one-hit kill mechanic with the throwing weapons, which also greatly contributes to why this game is so easy. For one thing, it totally breaks the stealth. There's a lot of words I could use to describe the stealth in Youngblood, but the word I'm going to go with is possible. It is possible to stealth your way through the majority of this game, even with the AI companion. The AI was only a problem for me 2 or 3 times. The far greater issue with the stealth is how effective it is. Despite Arcane's work on this game, the stealth doesn't feel like it was designed by them. Some areas consist of numerous very long corridors so that when you kill an enemy, no other enemy sees it, leaving you free to move on to the next person without fear of the first guy being found. This was likely designed this way because you can't move bodies. The problem this creates is that because the enemies are so spread out, areas essentially become throwing knife galleries that can be cleared out in seconds without anyone being the wiser. Silent takedowns are actually a hindrance in this game because the animation takes so long that you're often spotted while doing it. The game pushes you to max out your throwing knife upgrade so that you can kill enemies from afar, but by doing so promotes the stealth over the action because the stealth is a million times faster. You may have noticed that I'm invisible in most of these clips. Youngblood introduces an invisibility cloak that you can acquire and upgrade with skill points. The stealth would be entirely impossible without this ability because there's a lot of situations where going invisible is the only solution to your problem. I think it's quite clear at this point that the stealth was not designed for the solo experience. The final nail in the coffin for the stealth is that it works the same way it does in the last games. If you kill the commander, he can't call for reinforcements. You can destroy the alarms too, so that even if someone is alerted, there's no backup coming, and you can still clear the enemies quickly. My standard run of an area eventually boiled down to taking out the alarms if I felt like they'd actually be an issue, knifing everyone possible, silent takedowns of the super soldiers, and then walking past the larger enemies with the cloak. The only challenge when in stealth are the drones, which are terrible. They're only challenging because taking them out automatically triggers the alarm. I'm so adamant about the stealth's ease because while fun, it isn't fulfilling. Just watch this. Now, I might be good with aiming the knife, but I'm certainly not Stealth Gamer BR, and the fact that I was able to kill all those guys without raising an alarm was not because I'm good, it was because the game does most of the work for you by making you undetectable and able to kill with one hit. There's no sense of accomplishment like there is with a Dishonored where you successfully pull off a series of moves. I do appreciate the stealth being such a quick option at times, but the trade-off is that it isn't nearly as nuanced as it can be in Arkane's more stealth-oriented games. The action side, unfortunately, isn't as nuanced as the 3 games that came before it either. As demonstrated, dual-wielding the machine pistols makes quick work of enemies weak to the light ammo type. This is the reason you cannot dual-wield the other guns, or any combination of them with the craftwork weapons. The game is just not balanced for that, and while I understand that, it is restrictive, just like tying certain weapons to ammo types is. I really like the shotgun, but I can only use it against certain enemies because it's just not as effective as heavy ammo weapons. The action in this game is damn fun, but the sluggish nature of switching weapons does present itself as a problem. I hate the weapon wheel in this game. When you bring it up, an option is already selected, and the choices travel in an arc when you move your mouse instead of directly to the selection you'd like. To be fair, I also hated the weapon wheel in the new Colossus, but at least there you had the option to slow down time when making your selection, whereas you don't here. This is probably because of the co-op nature of the game, but I played it solo and would have loved a weapon wheel more like Doom's, where time was significantly slowed down, because in Youngblood, one panel of weapons has 4 different weapons inside it. When you're already in combat and then you have to choose the right weapon with the right ammo type, it's just the sloppiest thing ever. The problem isn't memorizing the ammo types, that's super easy. It's giving the player quick access to said ammo types, which this game fails at. Something this game doesn't fail at, however, are its visuals. Anyone that has said that this game features no visual improvements over the new Colossus is either blind or played this on console. Youngblood looks slightly better overall, but the real improvements are in the visual effects. The Electro Craftwork may have the best looking lightning I have ever seen in a game. The environments feature a level of photorealism that I haven't seen since Homefront the Revolution running on CryEngine. The shader work is phenomenal as well, and there's various under the hood features such as Nvidia's adaptive shading that do wonders for the performance. Now, I've saved the best for last. The characters. I think I'm supposed to tell you that I hate them, but I really don't. Jess and Soph, the Terror twins, are BJ and Anya's daughters on the search for BJ after he vanishes. Quite honestly, I find them sort of charming. They're goofy and awkward, but they're exactly what I would expect BJ's daughters to be like. BJ Blazkowicz is a character who had a horrible childhood that directly led him to join the army, where he went through hell and back, losing several friends and pieces of himself in the process. Why he wouldn't want this for his children should be obvious. Jess and Soph grew up in liberated America, and by every indication have never had contact with Nazis, and even though they've been trained to defend themselves, they're by and large nerds. If you want to make the argument that this makes them poor Wolfenstein protagonists, I definitely get that, but I see this as an origin story, and everyone has to start somewhere. The writing isn't phenomenal, but it has its moments.
Have you ever killed Nazis before?
Listen, ma'am. We were born to kill Nazis.
Tonton Stajak, born to kill Nazis. We ain't kill no Nazis.
All right, Arthur, they don't need to know that. So, Nazi. What'd you think?
We gotta kill him.
Shit, Arthur, what's the plan? Try to get a clean shot from up here? You're so not ready for this. You'll miss the shot.
Shut up, I am ready.
Yeah. We should try to get up close. Climb down there. I sneak up from the left, you sneak up from the right. Corner him and kill him. Man, are you crying?
I'm not fucking crying. Little nauseous is all.
I think I'm less harsh on the twins because I know that if I rolled back the clock 6 years, I'd probably have done and said things that were more in line with my maturity at the age of 18. I can look back and consider all that stuff cringeworthy, but I'm doing that with the benefit of hindsight and all the experiences that made me a more mature person. I hope this isn't the last we see of them, and I genuinely think it won't be. With more time to develop them as characters, I think they could be something special. Youngblood is a good game, in my opinion. I certainly had more fun with it than I was frustrated by it, and for $30, I think it offers a pretty great value. They've recently released a patch which addresses many of people's concerns with the RPG mechanics, and I think there will probably be future quality of life improvements on the game. With all this said, there's one more thing I'd like to address about this game. I am rarely concerned with the opinions of other critics, but it was legitimately annoying to have seen this game shit on for problems that were caused by the player and that were plainly seen in the footage used. There's a growing problem with criticism where just because a work is of lesser quality, that we tolerate misrepresentation or flat out lies being told about it. You can hate Youngblood for the mechanics it introduces, you can hate the execution of those mechanics, you can certainly hate it for its characters, but you can't hate it because you played it like shit and then form your argument that the game is bad when the reality is, you're bad. If a critic has 4 AAA games to play in a month, do you really think they're going to be able to fully understand those games and deliver a nuanced critique of all of them? You know the answer to that.